There was a cardinal in the Vatican who never slept in a palace. He slept among the poor. He drove ambulances through war zones. He broke the law to restore light to families left in the dark. And on the day he became a cardinal, he invited 280 homeless people to dine inside the Vatican. Rome loved him. The poor of the entire world loved him. And that was exactly the man Pope Leo XIV chose to remove from Rome. Why? The answer will surprise you. Before we go further, drop in the comments right now. What city are you watching from? I want to know where this is reaching. Tell me below. Pope Leo XIV has been in office since May 8th, 2025. In less than a year, he has already made decisions that have reshaped the Vatican, restoring autonomy to local dioceses, reforming the Church of Rome itself, gathering his cardinals in ways that had not happened in over a decade. He is a man with a clear vision, a man who does not move pieces on the board without reason. And on March 12th, 2026, he made a move that left Catholics around the world holding their breath. He removed the one man the poor of Rome could always count on. To understand why, you need to understand who that man truly was, because the magnitude of what Leo XIV did only becomes clear when you see the full weight of who he moved and where he sent him. His name is Cardinal Konrad Krivsky, and what comes next will stay with you for a very long time. He was born on November 25th, 1963 in the city of Łódź in central Poland, a gray industrial city far from the gilded halls of Rome, far from the marble corridors of the Vatican. His parents were teachers. His older brother Christoph died suddenly in his sleep at the age of 29 while at sea. Tragedy entered his life early, and perhaps it was that early encounter with loss and fragility that shaped the man he would become, a man who never learned to look away from suffering. He entered the diocese and seminary of Łódź in 1982. He later studied theology at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. In 1998, he returned to Rome to work in the office of liturgical celebrations. A year later, Pope John Paul II appointed him Papal Master of Ceremonies, the man responsible for every major public liturgical event presided over by the Pope. Christmas masses, Easter celebrations, canonizations, conclaves. The most sacred and solemn moments of the Catholic Church passed through his hands. He served John Paul II. He served Benedict XVI. He served with precision, with devotion, with the quiet discipline of a man who understood that his role was never about himself. For 15 years, he stood in the shadow of the chair of Peter, making sure that the beauty of the Church was preserved in every gesture, every word, every movement. And then in 2013, everything changed. Pope Francis had just been elected. The world was watching this new pope from Argentina with curiosity and wonder, a man who had chosen simplicity over ceremony, who had refused the papal apartments in favor of a small room at the Casa Santa Marta, who had washed the feet of prisoners on Holy Thursday, a man who meant what he said. 5 months into his pontificate, Pope Francis boarded a flight to Rio de Janeiro for World Youth Day. Sitting beside him on that flight was then Mentor Konrad Krivsky. And for 2 hours above the Atlantic Ocean, Pope Francis spoke to him about a mission unlike anything Krivsky had ever been asked to do. The Pope did not ask him to organize ceremonies. He did not ask him to manage documents or oversee procedures. He said something that Krivsky would carry with him for the rest of his life. According to Vatican News, the Pope told him, "You can sell your desk. You don't need it. You need to get out of the Vatican. Don't wait for people to come ringing. You need to go out and look for the poor." And then Francis added one more instruction, the one that would define Krivsky's entire mission. At the end of every day, the bank account must be empty. Everything is destined for works of charity. On August 3rd, 2013, Konrad Krivsky was officially appointed Papal Almoner, the man in charge of distributing the Pope's charity to those in need. He was given no desk. He was given no secretary. He was given no car of his own. He was given a mission, and he took it seriously in a way that the Vatican had perhaps never seen before. What he built over the next 13 years was not a charity office. It was a living, breathing expression of mercy, one that operated at the speed of need, not the speed of bureaucracy. As he himself said in October 2025 while presenting a papal document on charity at a Vatican press conference, "We are the Pope's first aid service, the ambulance ready to go out and help people in need on his behalf." He was not speaking in metaphor. He was describing his life. Within months of his appointment, he was personally distributing food, clothing, medicine, and sleeping bags to the homeless of Rome. He opened a free medical clinic near the Vatican, staffed by volunteers, doctors who gave their time so that the poorest residents of one of the world's most visited cities could receive care with dignity. He built a 30-bed dormitory for homeless people near St. Peter's Basilica, opened in October 2015, which he described as giving people their dignity back. He spent 4 days on the island of Lampedusa after a migrant boat capsized, praying alongside police divers as they worked to recover the bodies of the drowned from the floor of the Mediterranean Sea. He did not manage charity from a distance. He was the charity. And Pope Leo XIV knew exactly who this man was when he made his decision on March 12th. He had watched him. He had confirmed him in his role. He had sent a truckload of aid worth over 1 million euros to Ukraine on Krivsky's behalf just weeks before the announcement. Leo XIV did not remove someone he did not trust. He removed someone he trusted completely, which makes the question even harder to ignore. Why? And then came the night that made Krivsky famous across the entire world. The night that will help you understand everything. It was the night of May 11th, 2019, in the heart of Rome, just a few kilometers from St. Peter's Square, from the offices of the Vatican, from the halls where cardinals meet and decisions are made. There was a building, an abandoned government property that had been occupied since 2013 by nearly 450 people who had nowhere else to go. Migrants, families, children. Around 100 of them were minors. They had turned that crumbling space into something that resembled a home with workshops, a small carpentry shop, a rehearsal room, a craft beer laboratory that someone had managed to build from nothing. And then on May 6th, the electricity was cut. The energy company had made its decision. The building had accumulated a debt of over $300,000 in unpaid bills. The rules were clear. The power went off, and for 5 days, 450 people, including 100 children, lived without electricity, without hot water, in the dark. Konrad Krivsky heard about it. He did not send a letter. He did not file a request. He did not schedule a meeting. He drove to the building, found a manhole cover in the street outside, lifted it, and climbed down into it himself. A cardinal of the Catholic Church in his clerical clothes, descending into the underground infrastructure of Rome to reconnect electricity to families who had been left without light. He broke a police seal to do it. Technically, that was a crime. He did it anyway. When he came back up, the lights were on. The hot water was running. 450 people had power again. The reaction was immediate. Matteo Salvini, who was serving at the time as Deputy Prime Minister of Italy, criticized him publicly. The account spread across the world within hours. And when journalists asked Cardinal Krivsky how he could justify breaking the law, his answer was 4 words. The gospel is my law. He was never charged. And a year later, many of the migrants living in that building, most of them Muslim, not Catholic, sent him a video of gratitude because a cardinal had climbed into a manhole for them, not for cameras, not for applause, because they needed light. And he had the ability to give it to them. Pope Leo XIV, who was still years away from the papacy at that moment, would later inherit a church that had been shaped by gestures exactly like this one. A church that Francis had pushed out from behind its walls and into the streets. And when Leo took office in May 2025, he did not abandon that direction, he deepened it. He began speaking openly about a church that must be close to its people, not governing from a distance, not administering mercy from behind desks, but present, physically present in the places where people actually live. Krivsky had been living that vision for over a decade before Leo Baron ever put it into words. What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this is reaching. But the manhole in Rome was not the moment that defined Krivsky most deeply. That moment came 3 years later, and it came under the sound of something far darker than silence. In February 2022, Russian forces crossed into Ukraine. The images that reached the world in those first days were almost impossible to process. Cities under bombardment, families fleeing with what they could carry, mass graves discovered on the outskirts of towns that had been occupied and then abandoned. Pope Francis was devastated, and he did what popes do in moments of crisis. He sent a representative, but the representative he chose and the way he sent him was anything but ordinary. He sent Cardinal Krivsky not with a diplomatic delegation, not with a formal statement to be read at a press conference. He sent him in a vehicle personally driving one of the ambulances that the Vatican had blessed and prepared, heading east into a country enduring one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern European history. According to Vatican News, Krivsky drove one of those ambulances himself, accompanied on the long journey by a homeless man from Rome who had volunteered to help. A cardinal and a man without a home driving an ambulance through Europe toward a place where people were suffering. That image alone tells you everything you need to know about what kind of church these men were trying to be. Over the following 3 years, Krivsky made 10 missions to Ukraine. 10. He delivered generators, food, medicine, and ambulances to areas where the situation was most critical. In September 2022, during his 4th mission, he and his team came under gunfire in Kharkov. They kept going. He visited mass graves. He prayed over the remains of people who had been buried without ceremony, without witnesses, without anyone to mourn them properly. He brought the presence of the Pope, and through the Pope, the presence of the Church, to places where hope had become very difficult to find. Pope Leo XIV was watching all of this. He was not yet Pope, but he was already a man of deep conviction about what the Church should be. And when he was elected on May 8, 2025, one of his first acts was to confirm Krivsky in his role. He kept him. He trusted him. As recently as February 2026, just weeks before the announcement that left the world speechless, Leo XIV, C29th, sent a truckload of aid worth over $1 million to Ukraine, and it was Kripsky who oversaw that mission. The Pope was not distancing himself from Kripsky. He was watching him closely. And then on June 28th, 2018, before any of this, before Leo XIV, before Ukraine, Pope Francis had done something that revealed the depth of his regard for this man. He made Kripsky a cardinal. It was one of the most extraordinary consisties in recent memory because when Konrad Kripsky received his red hat, the symbol of a cardinal's willingness to give his life for the faith, he did not celebrate with Vatican officials or attend a formal reception in a gilded hall. He invited 280 homeless people to dine with him inside the Vatican. The men and women he had been serving on the streets of Rome, the ones who slept in the dormitory he had built near St. Peter's, the ones who came to the free clinic, the ones who had his phone number and called him at 2 o'clock in the morning when they needed help. They were his guests of honor. When asked about it, Kovsky said something that became one of the most remembered lines of his entire ministry. "This red hat is for the poor. I have no merit of my own." Pope Leo XIV, when he made his decision in March 2026, was not moving a bureaucrat. He was not reassigning an administrator. He was redirecting one of the most extraordinary human beings the modern church had produced. And that decision, that precise, deliberate, carefully considered decision, is what the world struggled to understand until Kripsky himself explained what the Pope had actually said to him. And that is where everything changes. Pope Leo XIV did not summon Kripsky to a formal meeting. He did not issue a decree and wait for a response. He asked a question. According to Cardinal Kripsky himself, speaking to OSV News on the very day the appointment was announced, March 12, 2126, the Pope approached him personally and asked whether after so many years serving at the heart of the universal church, he could see himself bringing all of that experience to a local church. Not a command, not an order, a question, a genuine personal question from one man to another. Well, Krivik's answer was immediate. "I accepted willingly," he said, "because the good of the church is born from closeness to the faithful." But then he said something that reveals the deeper character of this man, the thing that makes him impossible not to respect. He said it was not only about joy. From the very beginning of my priesthood, I believed that I had promised obedience to the bishop, and it is precisely in moments like these that this promise is fulfilled. One does not think about oneself, but about what one's superiors propose. 28 years in Rome, the most recognized face of papal charity in the world. Millions of people who knew his name, who had watched him drive ambulances and descend into manholes and invite the homeless to sit at his table. And when the Pope asked him to go, he did not hesitate. He did not negotiate. He said yes with joy and with the quiet, unshakable obedience of a man who had never confused his mission with his position. That distinction matters enormously because it tells you something critical about why Pope Leo XIV made this decision in the first place. Leo XIV is not a pope who makes casual appointments. In the months since his election, he has moved with deliberate intention, reforming structures, restoring autonomy to local dioceses, insisting that the church cannot be governed effectively from the center alone. He has said publicly, in words reported across multiple Catholic media outlets, that decision-making authority must return to local communities, that bishops must serve their people in the way that actually fits them, that the church grows not by administration, but by proximity. He has put those words into action. He reformed the diocese of Rome itself, rolling back centralization and restoring independence to local leaders. He gathered his cardinals in extraordinary consistory, something that had happened only once in the previous 12 years, and told them plainly that a pope cannot govern without his brothers. He is building something, and every appointment he makes is a brick in that construction. So, when he looked at Konrad Kripsky, the man who had spent 13 years proving that charity works best when it is personal, direct, and fearlessly close to the people it serves, he did not see someone to be honored with a comfortable retirement inside Vatican walls. He saw someone whose entire life had been a demonstration of exactly the kind of church Leo XIV is trying to build, and he sent him to build it. Wajga is not a small assignment. That is the language of a pope who is deploying one. Do you think the church is stronger when it reaches outward into cities, into communities, into the places where people actually live? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to know what you believe, because what Leo XIV did on March 12th was not a removal. It was a multiplication. Think about what Kripsky represented inside the Vatican. One man, one office, one city. Rome, extraordinary in what he accomplished, but ultimately geographically limited. The poor of Rome had him. The homeless near St. Peter's had him. The migrants in that building on the edge of the city had him. And through his missions, the people of Ukraine had him 10 times over. But 2.5 million Catholics in Wajga did not have him. They had never had someone like him until now. Pope Leo XIV looked at the most capable servant of mercy in his church and asked, what if, instead of one man serving one city from the center, that same man with everything he has learned, everything he has lived, Every lesson the poor of Rome taught him about what true charity actually means. What if he became the shepherd of an entire local church? What if the Robin Hood of the Vatican became the archbishop of his own people? Krivsky himself understood it perfectly. The good of the church is born from closeness to the faithful, he said. And closeness, real closeness, the kind he practiced every day for 13 years, cannot be administered from Rome. It has to be lived on the ground, in the streets, in the parishes, in the hospitals, in the schools, and the quiet corners of a city where people carry burdens that no one sees. That is what Leo XIV sent him to do, and the man Krivsky left behind to carry on the work in Rome. Archbishop Luis Maran de San Martin, a Spanish Austinian with deep personal ties to the Pope himself, received his own instruction the moment the appointment was announced. Krivsky sought him out, and he told him something that sounds simple but carries the weight of 13 years. You must become an alms yourself. Not someone who gives alms, not someone who manages alms, someone who becomes the gift. That is the standard, Krivsky said. That is the inheritance he left. And it is the standard that Pope Leo XIV expects to be maintained, because it is the standard Leo XIV himself is trying to live by in everything he does. There is a phrase that Conrad Krivsky carried with him every single day of his 13 years as papal almoner. Pope Francis gave it to him at the very beginning on that flight above the Atlantic, when the mission was still just a conversation between two men in the open sky. If you don't know what to do, always ask the Lord and ask what he would do in your place. That instruction shaped everything. Every manhole descended into every ambulance driven through the darkness toward a country at war. Every homeless man invited to sit at a table inside the most powerful institution in Christianity. Every phone call answered at 2 a.m. Every generator delivered. Every family restored to warmth and light. Every mass grave, where Krivsky knelt and prayed when there was nothing else left to give but presents. He learned, he said, more from the poor of Rome than from any seminary, any lecture, any formal instruction. Their needs had to be discovered, he told OSV News on the day he left, so that we would not help someone the way we wanted to help, but in the way they actually needed. It is very easy to force help on someone, for example, to give someone a sandwich when he doesn't even like what's inside. Instead, you ask the person what he or she really needs. And then he said the 3 words that summarize his entire life's work. That is true charity, not charity that feels good for the giver. Charity that actually serves the one who receives it. Charity that listens before it acts. Charity that is humble enough to ask and patient enough to wait for the answer. Pope Leo XIII inherited that understanding, and he is building a church around it. Since taking office, Leoto has made clear through his words, his appointments, and his reforms that the Catholic Church of the future cannot be a church that waits for people to come to it. It must go to them. It must be present in their cities, in their languages, in their struggles, in their daily lives. He has spoken about subsidiarity, the principle that decisions should be made at the most local level possible by the people closest to the reality on the ground. He has reformed structures. He has restored authority to bishops. He has gathered his cardinals as partners, not subordinates. And he has sent Konrad Krpovsky to Wajgay, not because Wajgay needed an administrator, not because a position needed to be filled, but because 2 and 12 million people deserved to have someone who had spent 28 years learning from the streets of Rome, from the roads of Ukraine, from the faces of the forgotten, what it truly means to be a shepherd. If this decision moved you in any way, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. A friend, a family member, someone who has lost faith, or someone whose faith has never been stronger. This belongs to all of them. Krivk's final words before leaving Rome were not about himself. They were about the work, about the people, about what he had received from those he had served, not what he had given them. If someone asked me how many poor people there are in Rome, he said, I would say, I don't know, because every person is different. Restoring the dignity of even one person was the most important thing. Numbers or systems never mattered. One person, one act of dignity, repeated every day without counting. That is the legacy he leaves in Rome. That is the standard he carries to watch. And that is the vision Pope Leo XIV is placing at the center of his pontificate. A church that does not measure its success in structures or budgets or institutional reach, but in the number of people who felt seen, served, and loved in the name of something greater than themselves. When the papal bull was read aloud at Krivsky's installation ceremony in Wajgay on March 28, 2026, the words Pope Leo XIV had chosen echoed through the cathedral. He called for brave helmsmen, distinguished men willing to lead not from comfort, but from courage. Krivsky stood there in the city where he was born in the decease, where his priesthood began surrounded by the people he had carried in his heart for 28 years, and received the words of a pope who trusted him completely, not with a desk, not with a palace, with a people. And perhaps that is the most important thing Pope Leo XIV has shown the world so far, not through a speech, not through a decree, but through a single decision on a Thursday in March. that the church he is building is not one that hoards its best people at the center. It is one that sends them out, that multiplies them, that trusts the local church to be the living face of mercy in every city, every street, every place, where someone is waiting in the dark for a light to come back on. Konrad Krivsky spent 13 years being that light in Rome. Now, Pope Leo XIV has asked him to be that light for 2.5 million souls, and he said yes with joy and without hesitation. There is something quietly extraordinary about that. In a world that measures success by visibility, by influence, by proximity to power, here is a man who had all of that, who sat at the center of the most recognized institution on earth, who was known by name in every corner of the Catholic world, who had the ear of 3 popes who could have remained in Rome honored and celebrated for the rest of his life. And he left willingly, gratefully, because a man he trusted asked him to serve in a different place, and that was enough. That kind of obedience is rare. Not the obedience of someone who has no choice, but the obedience of someone who has every choice and chooses to give it away. The obedience of someone who genuinely believes that his life does not belong to himself, but to the mission he was called to carry. Pope Francis planted that seed in 2013 on a flight to Rio de Janeiro when he told a young man senior to sell his desk and go find the poor. Pope Leo XIV is now watering what grew from that seed and transplanting it to soil where it can reach people who have never experienced anything like it. Łódź is about to discover what Rome already knows, that when Konrad Krivsky shows up without ceremony, without distance, without the protective layers that institutions build around themselves, something changes, not because of who he is, but because of what he carries, a way of seeing people, a way of being present, a conviction learned from the streets and the war zones and the dark corners of the city that every single human being deserves to be treated as if they matter, because they do. What do you think this decision says about the kind of church Pope Leo XIV is building? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Krivsky himself said it best in the simplest possible way on the day he left the Vatican after 28 years. The good of the church is born from closeness to the faithful, not from power, not from prestige, not from marble halls or gilded ceilings or the weight of centuries of tradition resting on stone walls in Rome. From closeness, that is the church Pope Leo XIV is building. And on March 12th, 2026, he showed the world exactly what that looks like. Not in a speech, not in a document, but in one deliberate, faithful, extraordinary decision. He sent his best man home. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what comes next. There's much more still being written. Thank you for being here. Until next time, God bless. The Archdiocese of Łódź covers a population of 2.5 million people. It is one of the largest dioceses in Poland, a country with deep Catholic roots, a complex recent past, and a church that is navigating real questions about how to remain relevant and present in a rapidly changing society. It is the city where Krivsky was born, the city he left at the age of 24 to go to Rome and serve 3 popes, the city he said he never truly left in his heart. I never really left Poland, he admitted on the day of his appointment. I always remained among the people, and I also had a bit of longing. He was going home, but he was not going home to rest. Pope Leo XIV wrote personally in the papal bull that was read publicly at Krivsky's installation ceremony in Łódź on March 28, 2026. The words the Pope chose were deliberate. He wrote that Łódź needs what he called brave helmsmen, distinguished men ready to lead with courage. That is the language of a pope who is not retiring an asset.